The hardest truths are not the ones we hide from others. They are the ones we wait too long to tell. On a cool October evening, the Hudson River reflected thousands of city lights like scattered pieces of glass across the water. Inside Harborview Grill, the dinner crowd moved through another ordinary Friday night. Glasses clinked. Conversations blended together. Soft jazz drifted through the room. Yet for Hannah Brooks, nothing about this night felt ordinary. It was her last shift. By sunrise, she would leave New York behind. 8 years. That was how long she had spent carrying plates through the narrow aisles of the restaurant overlooking the river. 8 years of double shifts. 8 years of smiling at strangers. 8 years of building a life in a city that never quite felt like home. Most of her co-workers knew she was leaving. Some had hugged her. Others had promised to stay in touch. But Hannah understood how life worked. People moved on. Cities moved on. Tomorrow, another waitress would wear her apron. Another name would appear on the schedule. The world would continue exactly as it always did. She adjusted the black apron tied around her waist and carried a tray toward a table near the windows. Her movements were graceful from years of repetition. She could balance 6 dinner plates without thinking. She could remember complicated orders without writing them down. She could tell which customers wanted conversation and which wanted silence. Tonight, however, her thoughts kept drifting toward the train ticket folded inside her purse. One way, New York to Montana. Departure, 8:15 a.m. Tomorrow. A fresh start. At least that was what she kept telling herself. Near the front entrance, the hostess suddenly straightened. Several staff members exchanged surprised looks. Hannah followed their gaze. A familiar figure had just stepped through the door. William Harrington, billionaire investor, philanthropist, one of the most recognizable businessmen in America, and a customer who had occupied the same corner table beside the river nearly every Thursday evening for the past 9 years. He rarely missed a week. Tonight was Friday. Hannah frowned slightly. That alone felt unusual. William handed his coat to the hostess and slowly scanned the room. For a brief moment, his eyes found hers. Something in his expression made her pause. He looked tired. Not physically tired. Emotionally tired. Like a man carrying something heavy for a very long time. Hannah approached with a polite smile. "Good evening, Mr. Harrington." "Good evening, Hannah." His voice sounded softer than usual. "Your usual table?" she asked. He nodded. "Please." As she guided him across the restaurant, she noticed something else. William carried a small, weathered leather briefcase. Not the expensive designer cases he normally used. This one looked old. Personal. Important. He placed it carefully beside his chair before taking a seat facing the river. Hannah handed him a menu, even though both of them knew he never needed one. "I heard tomorrow is your last day in New York," William said quietly. Hannah blinked. News travels fast. Sometimes. She smiled politely. "I think it is time for a new chapter." William looked out at the dark river beyond the windows. Then back at her. For several long seconds, he said nothing. Finally, he took a slow breath and rested one hand on the old leather briefcase. "Hannah," he said, his eyes filled with a seriousness she had never seen before. "Before you leave tomorrow, there is something you deserve to know." Hannah stood motionless for a second, her hand still resting on the edge of the table. Around them, the restaurant continued humming with life. A server laughed near the bar. Silverware clinked against plates. A couple near the window toasted an anniversary. Yet William's words seemed to separate them from everyone else. "There is something you deserve to know." Hannah forced a small smile. "That sounds serious." William looked down at the old leather briefcase beside his chair. "It is." Before she could respond, another table signaled for service. Instinct immediately took over. "I should get back to work." William nodded. "Of course." But as Hannah walked away, she felt his eyes following her. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable. In a way that felt almost sorrowful. For the next hour, she tried focusing on her final shift. She refilled drinks, delivered entrees, processed checks. Yet her thoughts kept returning to the billionaire sitting alone beside the river. She had known William Harrington for nearly a decade. Not personally, but enough to recognize his habits. He always arrived on Thursdays at exactly 6:15. He always ordered grilled salmon and sparkling water. He always left generous tips. And he never spoke more than necessary. Tonight, everything felt different. Twice she caught him staring out at the Hudson River with an expression she had never seen before. The look reminded her of someone standing at the edge of a goodbye. Near 9 o'clock, the dinner rush finally began to slow. The city lights outside had grown brighter against the dark water. Hannah approached William's table carrying a fresh glass of water. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked. William looked up slowly. "Actually, yes." He gestured toward the empty chair across from him. Hannah blinked. "Mr. Harrington, William." She smiled politely. "William." He nodded. "Please sit down for 5 minutes when your shift ends." Hannah hesitated. Normally, she would have declined immediately, but curiosity had already taken hold. 5 minutes, she said. 5 minutes. William's expression softened slightly. "Thank you." An hour later, the restaurant began closing. Chairs were stacked. Floors were cleaned. The last customers drifted into the cool night air. Hannah untied her apron and folded it carefully. 8 years of memories seemed wrapped into that simple piece of fabric. Her manager hugged her. A few coworkers wiped away tears. Promises were exchanged. Phone numbers confirmed. Then, one by one, everyone left. Eventually, only William remained seated by the window. The river beyond the glass reflected the moonlight in silver streaks. Hannah approached the table carrying a cup of coffee. She sat down across from him. For the first time in 9 years, they occupied the same side of the restaurant world. Not customer and waitress, just two people. William rested both hands on the weathered leather briefcase. The room felt strangely quiet. He took a slow breath. "Tomorrow you leave New York." Hannah nodded. "Yes." William lowered his eyes briefly before looking back at her. "Then tonight is probably my last chance." Without another word, he unlocked the brass clasp on the briefcase. Inside rested a thick stack of yellowed envelopes tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Hannah stared at them, confused. William's voice was barely above a whisper. "These were meant for you many years ago." Hannah stared at the bundle of envelopes resting inside the briefcase. The blue ribbon holding them together had faded with age. Some of the corners were bent. Others showed signs of being handled many times over the years. Nothing about them looked new. Nothing about them looked ordinary. She slowly looked up at William. "What do you mean they were meant for me?" William did not answer immediately. Instead, he carefully lifted the stack from the briefcase and placed it on the table between them. The restaurant had never felt so quiet. The soft music had stopped. The kitchen lights were being turned off one by one. Beyond the windows, the Hudson River flowed through the darkness, indifferent to the lives unfolding beside it. Hannah glanced down at the top envelope. Her breath caught. Written across the front in faded blue ink were 2 words. Hannah Brooks. She froze. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Yet something about seeing her name written that way felt strangely personal. Almost tender. "Who wrote these?" she asked softly. William's eyes remained fixed on the letters. "Someone who thought about you every single year." A chill moved through Hannah despite the warmth of the room. "I do not understand." William nodded slowly. "I know." He leaned back in his chair and released a long breath. For a moment, he looked less like one of the most successful men in America and more like someone carrying the weight of a promise. "Tell me something," he said gently. "What is the earliest memory you have of your father?" Hannah looked away. The question landed harder than she expected. "Not much." Her voice grew quieter. "A few photographs. A few stories from my mother." She forced a small smile. "Mostly questions nobody could answer." William listened carefully. "And what did your mother tell you?" Hannah stared at the river outside. "That he left before I was old enough to remember him." The words came out automatically. She had repeated them her entire life. That he chose a different life. Silence settled between them. William lowered his eyes. There was sadness there. Deep sadness. "And you believe that?" Hannah laughed softly. "Not because anything was funny. Because some wounds become familiar." "What else was I supposed to believe?" William did not answer right away. His gaze shifted toward the stack of envelopes. People often mistake silence for abandonment. Hannah frowned. Something in his tone made her uneasy. "William." His name sounded sharper now. "What is this really about?" He folded his hands together. "For 9 years I have sat at this restaurant watching you build a life." Hannah blinked. 9 years. Every Thursday. He smiled faintly. "Sometimes you remembered my order before I sat down." Hannah felt her confusion growing. "Why?" William's expression softened. "Because I promised someone I would." The room seemed to narrow around them. Hannah looked at the letters again, then back at William. "Promised who?" For the first time that evening, genuine emotion appeared in his eyes. Regret. Loyalty. Grief. Your father. Hannah stopped breathing for a moment. The word hung between them like a bell that had been ringing for decades. Her heart pounded. My father. William nodded once. He was my best friend. The river moved silently beyond the glass. Somewhere in the city, a train whistle echoed in the distance. But inside that empty restaurant, Hannah felt the foundation of everything she believed about her life begin to shift. Hannah stared at William as if the room had suddenly become unfamiliar. Your father. He was my best friend. The words echoed through her mind again and again. For years, she had imagined dozens of versions of the man she never knew. Some kind, some selfish, some heroic, some disappointing, but never this. Never a connection sitting quietly across from her at a restaurant table. William slowly reached for the stack of letters. His movements were careful, almost reverent. His name was Daniel Brooks, he said softly. Hannah swallowed. Hearing her father's full name spoken aloud felt strangely intimate. You knew him well. William gave a faint smile. Better than anyone. His eyes drifted toward the dark river beyond the windows. We met when we were 17. Two boys with more ambition than money. For the first time that evening, a warmth appeared beneath the sadness in his expression. We shared apartments, bad jobs, cheap meals, and impossible dreams. Hannah listened without interrupting. She wanted every detail, every fragment, every missing piece. William continued. Your father was the kind of person people trusted immediately. He had this way of making strangers feel important. Hannah lowered her eyes. Something about that description felt familiar. Not because she remembered him, because it sounded like the person she had always hoped he was. Then what happened? She asked quietly. The smile disappeared. William rested one hand on the letters. Life happened. Silence settled between them. Hannah could see him choosing his words carefully. When you were born, Daniel changed. His voice softened. You became his entire world. Hannah felt emotion rising unexpectedly. She looked away before William could notice. That is not what I was told. William nodded. I know. He seemed neither surprised nor angry. Only tired. That is part of why we are here tonight. Hannah's heartbeat quickened. She glanced at the envelopes again. You keep saying things like that. William met her gaze. Because the truth is complicated. For several moments, neither spoke. Somewhere in the distance, a ferry horn echoed across the river. The city continued moving while the past slowly unfolded between them. Finally, William opened the briefcase again. Beneath the letters rested a worn photograph. He slid it across the table. Hannah picked it up carefully. The image showed two young men standing beside an old pickup truck. One was unmistakably William decades earlier. The other had her eyes. Her smile. Even the slight curve of his shoulders felt familiar. Hannah stared at the photograph. That is him. William nodded. That is Daniel. A tear formed before she realized it. She quickly brushed it away. I spent my entire life wondering what he looked like when he smiled. William looked down. He smiled every time he talked about you. Hannah closed her eyes briefly. The sentence landed somewhere deep inside her. For years, she had carried a single belief. That her father had chosen to leave. That she had not been important enough for him to stay. Now, sitting beside the Hudson River on the final night before leaving New York, that belief was beginning to crack. William gently placed his hand on the stack of envelopes. Hannah, he said quietly, before this night is over, you are going to learn something very important. She looked up. William's eyes were filled with both regret and resolve. Your father never stopped trying to reach you. Hannah could not look away from the letters. They sat between her and William like a bridge connecting two different versions of her life. One was the life she thought she understood. The other was beginning to emerge from the shadows. If he never stopped trying to reach me, she said carefully, then why did I never hear from him? William closed his eyes briefly. It was the expression of a man revisiting a regret he had carried for years. Because life does not always separate people through cruelty, he said quietly. Sometimes it separates them through mistakes. Hannah leaned back in her chair. The answer only deepened the mystery. What mistakes? William reached for the first envelope in the stack. The paper had yellowed with age. The postmark was nearly impossible to read. After your parents separated, Daniel moved west for work. He believed it would only be temporary. He wanted to build something stable before bringing you into a better life. Hannah listened without speaking. Every word felt precious. Every detail felt stolen from years she could never get back. At first, William continued. He wrote constantly. Every week. sometimes every few days. He gently placed the envelope in front of her. This was the first one. Hannah stared at her name written across the front. Her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the edge of the paper. Why was it never delivered? William lowered his gaze. Because it came back. Hannah frowned. What do you mean? Wrong address. Return mail. Lost forwarding information. Administrative errors. Small things that became large things. He paused. And every time a letter came back, Daniel wrote another one. Hannah swallowed hard. The image formed instantly in her mind. A father sitting alone somewhere, writing letter after letter to a daughter he could not reach. He could have called. Even as she said it, her voice sounded uncertain. William nodded. He tried. And the number changed. Silence settled over the room again. Hannah looked toward the river. Her entire life, she had imagined indifference. She had never imagined persistence. Then why did nobody tell me? William took a slow breath. Because eventually people stop questioning stories they have heard for years. Hannah looked back at him. Including me. Including all of us. The honesty in his voice made it difficult to be angry. William carefully untied the faded blue ribbon around the letters. There were dozens of envelopes. Some thick, some thin, some written in neat handwriting. Others rushed and uneven. Together, they represented years of waiting. Years of hope. Years of unanswered messages. Every birthday, William said softly. Every Christmas. Every major milestone he thought you might be experiencing. He wrote. Hannah felt tears gathering despite her efforts to stay composed. You kept all of them? William nodded. He asked me to. His voice grew quieter. He made me promise. Hannah looked at the stack again. For years she had believed she had nothing from her father. No memories. No conversations. No explanations. Yet now an entire lifetime seemed to be resting on the table in front of her. William gently placed his hand atop the letters. There is one thing you need to understand before you read them. Hannah met his eyes. What? William's expression carried both sorrow and admiration. Your father never stopped believing that one day you would find your way back to these letters. Hannah looked down at the stack of letters for a long time. The weight of them seemed impossible. Not because of paper. Because of years. Years she could never relive. Years her father had spent writing words she had never read. Carefully, she reached for the top envelope. Her fingers traced the faded ink of her name. May I? She asked quietly. William nodded. They were always yours. Hannah opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The date at the top stopped her breath. It had been written on her 7th birthday. She began reading silently. Within seconds her eyes filled with tears. The letter was simple. Her father described the cake he wished he could have shared with her. He wondered whether she still liked chocolate frosting. He hoped she had made friends at school. He told her he was proud of her, even though he could only imagine the person she was becoming. Hannah blinked rapidly. Every sentence felt painfully ordinary. Yet that was exactly what made it extraordinary. This was not a letter from a man who had forgotten her. It was a letter from a father trying desperately to remain present in a life he could not reach. She lowered the paper. He really wrote all of these? William nodded. Every one. Hannah opened another. Then another. Different years. Different birthdays. Different Christmas mornings. Some letters included small stories about Daniel's life. Others included advice he hoped she might need someday. One letter talked about learning to make pancakes and failing repeatedly. Another described a stray dog that followed him home. Together, they painted the portrait of a man she had never known and somehow missed her entire life. Why did he never come himself? She asked softly. William's expression grew heavier. He tried. Hannah looked up. Tried. William folded his hands together. More than once. The room felt smaller now. More intimate. More fragile. What happened? William stared at the river beyond the glass. Each time he believed he had finally found a way back into your life, something changed. New addresses. New jobs. New circumstances. He paused. Then time began doing what time does. It made every year feel harder than the one before. Hannah understood that more than she wanted to admit. Some distances grow larger simply because nobody knows how to cross them anymore. William slowly reached into the briefcase once more. This time he removed a smaller envelope. Unlike the others, it had never been sealed. The paper looked newer, less worn. This one is different, he said. Hannah accepted it carefully. Why? William's voice became almost a whisper. Because it was the last letter he ever wrote. Hannah stared at the envelope. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. The last. William nodded. His eyes reflected years of grief and loyalty. A few weeks before he passed away, he asked me to visit him. Silence settled over the restaurant. That day he gave me those letters. Hannah tightened her grip on the envelope. And he made you promise to keep them? William looked directly at her. No, his answer surprised her. He made me promise something much harder. Hannah felt her pulse quicken. What was it? William glanced at the train ticket sticking out of her purse. Then back at her. He made me promise that when the time was finally right, I would tell you the truth about why he disappeared. Hannah felt as though the air had become heavier. The last letter remained in her hands, unopened. The train ticket waited inside her purse. The river flowed quietly beyond the windows. Yet everything seemed suspended between the past and the future. Tell me, she said softly. William studied her face for a moment. For years he had imagined this conversation. For years he had rehearsed the words. Now that the moment had finally arrived, they felt no easier to say. Your father did not disappear because he stopped loving you, William began. He disappeared because he believed it was the only way to protect what he loved most. Hannah frowned. Protect me from what? William lowered his eyes. From his mistakes. Silence stretched between them. Hannah waited. William slowly reached into the briefcase and removed a worn leather journal. The cover showed years of use. Daniel started a small business when you were very young, he explained. At first everything seemed promising. Then the company failed. Hannah listened carefully. People lose businesses all the time. Yes, William said. But your father was different. He blamed himself for every person affected by that failure. Every employee. Every family. He paused. He believed he had let everyone down. Hannah stared at the journal. That still does not explain why he left. William nodded. It does not. He took a slow breath. After the business collapsed, Daniel spent years trying to rebuild his life. Every decision he made revolved around one goal. Hannah already knew the answer. Me. You. William's voice softened. He wanted to return to you with something stable. Something worthy. Hannah felt tears gathering again. He did not need to be rich. I know. William's expression revealed both sadness and understanding. But he believed he did. The answer hurt because it felt human. Not dramatic. Not cruel. Simply human. A father convincing himself he needed to become more before he deserved to come home. William continued. The years passed. Every setback made him feel further away. Every failure made him postpone the reunion one more time. Hannah looked toward the dark river. And eventually there was no reunion. William remained silent for several seconds. Eventually he became afraid. She turned back toward him. Afraid of what? That too much time had passed. The words landed heavily. Hannah understood them immediately. Sometimes people stay away so long that returning feels impossible. Not because they do not care, because they care too much. William opened the journal and carefully turned a few pages. Folded inside was a photograph. Daniel stood beside a small house under construction, smiling proudly. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, for Hannah. Someday. Hannah pressed a hand against her mouth. William's voice grew quieter. Everything he built, every goal he chased, every sacrifice he made, he imagined sharing with you. Tears rolled down Hannah's cheeks. Not because she had found all the answers. Because for the first time, she saw her father as a real person. Flawed. Hopeful. Afraid. Loving. William gently closed the journal. There is one final truth, he said. The hardest one. Hannah looked up through tears. William's eyes reflected years of regret. The reason I have been sitting at that table every week for 9 years is because Daniel asked me to watch over you until I knew you were ready to hear his story. Hannah felt the world tilt beneath her. For 9 years. Every Thursday. Every quiet conversation. Every generous tip. Every familiar smile across the restaurant. None of it had been accidental. William had been keeping a promise. She looked at him through tears, struggling to reconcile the billionaire she thought she knew with the man sitting before her now. You watched over me all this time, she whispered. William nodded slowly. Not to interfere with your life. His voice was gentle, only to make sure you were never completely alone. Hannah lowered her eyes. Memories began rearranging themselves. The unexpected scholarship opportunity years ago, when she could barely afford classes. The anonymous recommendation that helped her secure a better apartment after a difficult move. The quiet moments when opportunities seemed to appear exactly when she needed them most. That was you, she said. It was not a question. William hesitated before answering. Sometimes. Hannah let out a shaky breath. Why? William looked toward the letters spread across the table. Because I made a promise to a dying friend. The restaurant seemed impossibly still. Even the river beyond the windows appeared calmer now. Hannah carefully picked up the final envelope, the one her father had written near the end of his life. For several seconds, she simply held it. Then she opened it. The paper inside was folded neatly. Her father's handwriting appeared immediately. Strong, steady, familiar in a way that made no sense. Hannah began reading silently. The first sentence shattered what remained of her defenses. My dear Hannah, if you are reading this, then my friend finally found the courage I hoped he would. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She continued reading. Her father wrote about the life he wished they could have shared, about baseball games he imagined attending, about birthdays he pictured celebrating, about ordinary moments that had become extraordinary simply because he missed them. There was no bitterness in the letter, no blame, only love, page after page of love. Hannah reached the final paragraph and stopped breathing for a moment. If there is one thing I hope you learn from my mistakes, it is this. Never let fear convince you that you have more time than you do. Tell people what they mean to you while you still can. Her vision blurred. She lowered the letter. William remained silent, giving her space. Eventually, Hannah looked up. He knew. William nodded. Yes. He knew he was running out of time. Another nod. Hannah pressed the letter against her heart. For years, she had imagined a father who chose absence. Now she had discovered a father who spent decades loving her from a distance he never found a way to cross. The pain remained, but it had changed shape. It was no longer abandonment. It was loss. Real loss. Human loss. William reached into the briefcase one final time. This time he removed a small brass key attached to a worn leather tag. He placed it gently beside the letters. Hannah looked at it with confusion. What is that? William's expression softened. The last thing your father asked me to give you. Hannah looked at the small brass key resting beside the letters. Compared to everything she had learned that night, it seemed almost insignificant. Yet something about it felt important. The worn leather tag attached to it carried a handwritten address. She read it twice before looking up. What is there? William smiled gently. A storage unit. Hannah blinked. A storage unit? William nodded. Your father rented it years ago. She stared at the key. And he kept it all this time? He kept paying for it all this time. The answer left her speechless. William leaned back in his chair. He filled it with things he hoped to share with you one day. Hannah's eyes widened slightly. What kind of things? William's expression softened. The kind of things fathers save. The words settled quietly between them. Photographs. Birthday gifts. School supplies he never got to give her. Souvenirs from places he visited. Pieces of a life built around someone he never stopped loving. Hannah carefully closed the final letter and held it against her chest. The restaurant was completely empty now. Only a few lights remained on. Beyond the windows, the river reflected the glow of the sleeping city. For the first time in years, Hannah did not feel alone. She felt connected to something larger than the story she had carried her entire life. William checked his watch. Then he looked at her train ticket resting on the table. Your train leaves at 8:15. Hannah followed his gaze. The ticket had represented freedom only a few hours earlier. A fresh start. An escape. A way to leave unanswered questions behind. Now it looked different. Not wrong. Just different. I do not know what I am supposed to do now, she admitted. William smiled. You do not have to decide tonight. Hannah laughed softly through her tears. That might be the first time anyone has told me that. They sat quietly for a moment. Then William reached across the table and gently pushed the stack of letters toward her. Take them. Hannah nodded. I will. She carefully gathered the envelopes, the photograph, the journal, the final letter, and the brass key. Not because they were valuable, because they belonged to her. They always had. Hours later, dawn began to brighten the skyline. Hannah stood inside Grand Central Terminal with her suitcase beside her. Travelers hurried through the station. Announcements echoed overhead. Her train would begin boarding soon. She reached into her purse and touched the brass key. Then she looked at the ticket in her other hand. For several seconds, she simply stood there, thinking, remembering, breathing. Finally, she smiled. Not because everything had been fixed, not because the past could be changed, but because the truth had given her something she had never possessed before. Peace. Slowly, she folded the train ticket and slipped it back into her purse. Then she turned and walked toward the station exit. Somewhere in the city waited a storage unit filled with memories. Somewhere waited a father she would never meet but could finally understand. And somewhere behind her, a promise made long ago had finally been kept. Sometimes the people we lose leave behind more than memories. Sometimes they leave behind the truth we need to find our way home.